Hello, everyone. I think we're live. Yeah. Welcome. My name is Nicolette Finder, and I am a Senior Account Manager here at the Muse. I am thrilled to be your moderator today for this panel discussion, Proud at Work, celebrating LGBTQIA plus inclusivity in the workplace. Today's event will provide an opportunity to learn from leaders and advocates in the LGBTQIA plus community who will be sharing best practices on creating an inclusive and safe workplace. We'll celebrate the hard work and dedication of these individuals who are champions for LGBTQ plus equality at their organization, and we'll discuss how to continue pushing for greater acceptance and understanding for all individuals in the workplace. With that, I'd love to start with introductions. Would each panelist please share your name, title, pronouns, and whether you're an ally or member of the LGBTQ plus community? Marika, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mariko Sweeney. I use she, they pronouns. I work at General Motors. In my day job, I am in the VDDV space, which is virtual design, development, and validation as an acoustics engineer with my friend Jameson. And then for my gay job, as we like to jokingly call them at GM, I work on the GM Plus ERG board as the president.
Amazing.
And then also, I'm a member of the community.
Awesome. Jameson, up next.
Hi, everyone. I am Jameson Hamilton, and I use pronouns they, she. As Mariko said, I also work at GM in virtual design development and validation, doing acoustics analysis for my day job. And for my gay job, I am the career development chair for the GM Plus Employee Resource Group, and I am a member of the community.
Amazing. I love the gay job. That's my favorite. I'm stealing that. Kaden, up next.
Hi, I'm Kaden Robinson. I'm a talent acquisition partner. I work specifically with technical recruiting for IT and digital business, and I am a member of the community, and my preferred pronouns are he and him.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sharday.
Hi, my name is Sharday Anderson. My pronouns is she, her. My day job, I'm a talent acquisition and manufacturing engineering. My gay job is GM Plus Talent Acquisition Chair. Oh, and I am an ally to the community.
Amazing. Thank you all. Well, I want to kind of start off our conversation with a conversation about allyship. So our first question is, what role can allies play in creating a safe and inclusive workplace for LGBTQ plus employees? Sharday, why don't we start off with you?
As an ally, it's just really important to educate, spread awareness, not just because, like, not just in the sense of, okay, during Pride Month, I'm going to read something or post a picture, but it's ongoing throughout. If you see something, discrimination, some bias, speak up, support, educate yourself, and as well as others.
Absolutely. Kaden, I'll kick it over to you next.
So allies are probably the biggest piece to success in creating an inclusive environment. They're crucial for creating welcoming and inviting spaces that are inclusive and important piece of elevating the voice of a marginalized community. For LGBT individuals in the workplace, it can be very hard to be your authentic self at work. And anytime that individuals who have the pride and the courage to come to work and be themselves, having allies around you that make you comfortable, make you seen, make you heard, are an important piece of just building that workplace culture that creates a safe space for everybody.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you both for sharing. If anyone else would like to share anything, yeah,
I'd love to hop in if I could.
Of course.
Something that I've found has been really important for allyship and me and my personal journey of coming out at work and being out in my professional life has been having those personal relationships. It's really great to be an ally to the community. It's really great to be involved in activism and different policy changes that are happening around you. But something else to look at is look at those personal relationships, right? Take the time to get to know people as their whole self. I know a lot of times when you talk about writing, you talk about one-dimensional versus three-dimensional characters, right? Or multi-dimensional characters. And a lot of time I think we feel that way about people too. We take, a label associated with them and make a lot of assumptions based on that instead of looking at that whole person. So something to consider is, yes, they are part of the community. Yes, that is part of their identity, but there's so much more than that as well, right? So look at the whole person and get to know the person, and don't judge them by what they choose to associate with, but instead by, the contents of their hearts, their morals, what they put out into the world, how they treat others.
Yeah, thank you. I think that piece, the contents of their heart, another line I'm stealing. I love that. It's important. Awesome. Well, let's get into question number 2. So, while this conversation is aimed to, of course, be inclusive of all of us within the LGBTQ plus community, I wanted to take a specific moment to talk about some of the unique challenges transgender and non-binary individuals are facing in the workplace, and how employers and allies can show support and alleviate some of the impact. Would any of our panelists here feel comfortable sharing their personal experiences of facing challenges within the workplace, and or suggest ways employers and allies can offer support in such situations?
I'll talk about that. Thank you, first of all, for asking this question, because I think a lot of times it can be forgotten. And I myself am somebody who just recently, within the past year, have started going on a gender adventure, as I like to call it, and kind of discovering who I am. And one of the greatest things about doing that is that I have leadership and management that has been supportive, kind of almost in a passive way. I changed my preferred name, and without any arguing of why are you changing this or doing that, they just accepted and started using that. And if they didn't use it, they would apologize and say, "Oops, here's here's the name that you prefer." And so that's been really nice to not have to worry about facing backlash, but having coworkers and managers that just accept that I know myself better than anybody else, and take what I'm asking them to give me and give it to me. And that's been one of the most amazing things about all of this.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
I'll take a second attempt at that one too. So I have a very different narrative than Jameson does. I am part of the trans community, but I am of a binary gender, and I transitioned a long time ago. Like almost 15 years ago, I started. So having my story is very long, and there are some definite common themes. This is Luna, everybody. So my story really starts off with just having a space where I couldn't be myself at work. It wasn't safe, 5, 10, 15 years ago to be yourself at work. And when the culture started changing and people started having the discussions and being more open, my story changed a lot, but I was never open about it at work. This is the first time that I have been open at work in my professional career is at GM. And I can genuinely tell you that the challenges that I faced in my career prior to GM was everything from transphobia to kind of disparate treatment, where you would hear a side comment, little microaggressions where you would get frustrated when, someone would say something like, even in passing, like, "Oh, you look good today." Well, you're always questioning in my head, is it because I look good because I'm well dressed, or because I did really well today, or is it because I look better than how I usually do? There's always that second guessing that happens when you're not being as open and as authentic as you can be at work. And the challenge comes in when you've really got everyone who doesn't know around you not knowing your story. It's easy to ignore. It's easy to be glossed over, and you don't feel safe bringing it up because it will question your narrative that you've built for yourself at work. So when it comes to being an ally and involving yourself and being open at work, I think one of the biggest things that we have to overcome is the ability to talk about it. It needs to be an open conversation, right? It needs to have a narrative behind it where it's not just the management knowing what it is, but also how to navigate those situations, having resources for those individuals to go to have their questions answered without having to be that person in the room that educates everyone around you. It's not a transgender person to educate you about gender expression and identity. It's your privilege to hear their story, not the other way around. And the question that really always comes into the back of my mind is, when I reflect on all of those years before, why is now different? Is it because of the company? Is it because of the people? Is it the culture? And I can tell you it's all of those things. The narrative that we've built around dialogues at GM and also in our teams and in our workspaces are completely different. It doesn't start off with, hi, how are you? It's, hi, my pronouns are. And when you introduce yourself for the very first time, that is a complete safe space, and you know it, that you can share your experience and have their experience be shared with you. And it's an immediate way of just starting off all on the same page. So while I will say it's very intimidating to be out at work, it feels very much so like I am being open for the very first time with who I am. But in my personal life, I've been mentoring young trans people for almost a decade. And I can tell you that having the dialogues that we have now and what I encourage my mentees to do, completely different than what I would have advised even 3 or 4 years ago. So I think we are going in the right direction, and GM is been a huge game changer for me personally to just kind of recognize my own narrative and come to terms with it. There's a lot of healing that has to happen.
I love that answer, Kaden. And I would just like to, first of all, highlight all the amazing work you're doing within the trans community itself, but also highlight what you said about, not putting the weight on that marginalized group. I think this is something that happens in the larger DE&I discussion a lot, is where that responsibility falls. And I will say, as someone who, now has been given the opportunity to serve others as a leader, I think the way I say that is important, serves, right? That is our job as leaders. All the people you see on this panel today are leaders at our company, and all of them choose to lead by example. I think that is something that not everyone who is an ally necessarily thinks about right away, right? It's not just your job to support them when they need support. It is also your job to get ahead of that, right? You need to be proactive in what you do. When I came out as non-binary to our boss, luckily Jameson had done it first. So, they took the blunt of it. No, just kidding. But Jameson came out first, and that set the way for me, right? It was holding that door open. And then what our boss did really well is he never asked, right? He just said, okay, and accepted it at face value. And he didn't put the work back on Jameson and myself as non-binary individuals to then teach him why we use the pronouns we do, why we use the terminology we do. And I think that's something else that employers need to think about a lot too, right? You have to think about who you're hiring to lead other people. You want to make sure they have the same values as their company and that they are pushing in the right direction that you want to go into. GM has really made a large shift over the past couple of years, and we've seen the results of it, right? We have a more diverse workplace. We have these ERGs that are speaking out about big social issues and are there for our employees. But again, I think it comes back to don't put the work on that group. If you're there to be working on your racial justice skills, you shouldn't be asking those marginalized racial groups to teach you what you need to know. There are resources out there, and it is on you. The onus is on you to stop further expecting from that marginalized group. So I think taking the time to educate yourself preemptively and also stay engaged, right? You can tell by just the past couple of years with the queer community, we've changed from LGBTQ to LGBTQIA to now 2S LGBTQ, right? So we've started recognizing our two-spirit, like family members as well. And it's important, especially in a minority group like the queer community, which is the #1 largest growing minority group, to stay on top of it. It is my job as a person in that space to educate myself. What is the correct terminology? What is the newest, most inclusive way to talk to people? And I think putting that responsibility on yourself is a really, really big part of not only having an inclusive company, but having a inclusive just relationship with your other employees and other allies to the organization, people within those marginalized groups.
Thank you all for sharing. I mean, this is such a hugely important piece of this conversation. And so I think there's a lot that we can take away from this. And I think something that I am hearing from the panelists here is that GM and specifically GM Plus, the ERG is creating that space to have a dialogue and dialogue, right? It goes both ways. So and I think the leaders here of the ERG, you all are putting in the work to make that happen. So I want to thank you for doing that at an organization as large as GM. And I hope that every organization can take pieces of this and start to implement some of these practices every day at their organization as well. So thank you all for sharing. Moving into question number 3, I think this is also, I mean, all these questions are important, but I think this is important as some of our viewers are most definitely navigating the job search and career change process currently. So would love to hear from the panelists, what advice would you offer to individuals within the LGBTQIA+ community who are job searching or considering a career change? Are there any specific resources you found and would recommend that have been helpful? Sharday, I'll kick it over to you first.
Well, what I tell my candidates a lot of the time of doing phone screens is that you also have the power. It's not just me as a recruiter or the hiring manager has the power to hire you. You have the power to decide whether or not this company is a fit for you. And ways of doing that is researching the company, going on the company's website, not just, what's their core values, what's, they stand for, but dig deeper. If they have an inclusion page or have an ERG page or business resource page, and see if that works for you. And also too, you have to be in a sense of comfortable of asking, what are your incentives for the LGBTQ plus program? Do you have anything? What about diversity and inclusion training? How often that happens? So I open those doors to candidates to ask those questions about how has that worked for you. I just know, being an African-American woman in corporate, those are a lot of the things that I look for as representation. Is there a group that I can go to that I feel safe at, that they would understand me? Is there mentorship, networking? I've had people that I've talked to that let me know that they're going through transitioning and they're already nervous even starting the conversation. My job as a recruiter and also an ally is just saying, okay, that's fine. Moving on to next question. And when they hear that, they get a sense of relief. Not that I'm ignoring them. I'm letting them know that this is a safe place. You are welcome here. And, we have resources for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very important. Mariko, if there's anything you'd like to add here.
Yeah, I'd love to yes and Sharday. So Sharday has taught me quite a bit about talent acquisitions. And I started working with her this year. And something that she said that really sticks out to me is you have the power, right? So that's something I've taken with me to the younger students that I work with and volunteer with who are in the queer community who are applying to jobs, is you have the power as much as that company does, right? That's why you get to negotiate your salary. That's why you talk about what benefits you get in your package. So I think that's something you have to remember as a young individual, because a lot of times we're like, oh, I need to present my best self. I have to make sure this company likes me. But what about you liking the company? Does that company meet your standards? Are they doing things that align with your values, your morals, are going to better you? Or is this a company that you're settling at, right? So just like people joke about in relationships, you can settle, but you can settle with your relationship with work too. If a company does not meet your expectations, you are so empowered and should feel so empowered to walk away. GM, I always say GM is not showing up at these recruiting events to get you interested in GM, right? I'm here to prove to you why my company is worth your time and your energy, right? It's something I think about a lot. And I think it's also an empowerment from the inside of I own my identity and my identity is not compromisable, right? You should never compromise who you are to appease an employer. There's so many great companies out there doing the work, walking the walk, talking the talk, and, putting in that time. So don't settle for less than what you deserve as an employee, ever, whether that's the pay they offer you, the benefits they give you, the amount of vacation days. There's all these little things that add up though, and will overall shape your experience. So if that company immediately isn't blowing you away and you're not sold, saying that I'm clearly going to be valued and they're going to put into me the work that I put into them, walk away. It is always, I think, better to walk away, if you have the privilege to do so, the financial stability, the home situation to do so, if you don't feel like you're aligned with your company. And again, you have to consider the privilege there, right? Some of us don't have the privilege to say no to a job. We need the money. We don't have a safe home situation, especially in the queer community, right? We don't always have regular family as much as we just have our chosen families. So take that into perspective too. Sometimes there's a privilege aspect to that, but if you do have the privilege to be picky, be picky.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's that, again, is such an important point, is that you have the power. It is, and that power looks different for every individual in that situation. But the interview is an interview you're interviewing the company just as much as the company is interviewing you. And so recognizing that and then putting that into practice, whatever that means for you, is a huge takeaway and a huge lesson. So thank you all for sharing. I would also I want to take a moment and just encourage, if there are questions from anyone joining us today, please throw them in our chat. We are more than happy to get to those in a little bit. So let's see those questions. Awesome. All right. So, and again, I think this is a perfect segue into question number 4. We know that the interview is a two-way street. You're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. And we also know that the interview is a great time to have a conversation about all the things that aren't appearing on a job description, such as company culture and values. And we've talked about this too, but while the burden of asking these specific questions shouldn't be solely on the candidate, what questions would you recommend LGBTQIA plus individuals ask to help better understand how inclusive a company's workplace truly is? Kaden, I'll pass this one to you first.
So being in talent acquisition, I have the privilege of setting up these conversations for success. And I ask all of my candidates what their preferred pronouns are. I introduce myself with my own. And a lot of that goes into immediately creating that safe dialogue with my candidates. And that way they know and I know. I mean, there are some times that I'm explaining what a pronoun is, but there are lots of times when I'm also having the opportunity to engage with candidates and starting off all on the same footing. I like them to know who I am and I want to know who they are, since it is so much focused on their experience, just like it should be. And then the other piece is that if a recruiter doesn't ask you that, ask them. Introduce yourself with, hey, my name is X and I go by they, them pronouns. Wonderful. That person may never have heard of they, them pronouns, but that is also an opportunity for the candidate to educate the recruiter and make that company a little bit more inclusive. You shouldn't feel like you have to, but it's always there for you. And then the other piece that I think is really important is, in the day and age of virtual interviews, a lot of times if you're going into an on-site position, one of the best things you can ask is, are there gender neutral single stall restrooms? You might not know that because you're not on site and you can't see that for yourself. So if you're going to be in a position where you're going to be in a facility, that's a real question that you should be asking if you need something that is going to affirm that for you. Another question that I have found to be very telling is, does this company's benefit package cover domestic partners? This is something that GM very much so just rolled out. And GM Plus was a key contributor to that. I'm not going to take any credit. I benefit from it, so I'm extremely happy about it. And then the last thing that I really encourage candidates to ask is, what type of resources do managers have? Because in the event that something does come up, I had to go research, and I was like, what resources do we offer HR? What type of resources do we offer our hiring managers, and the correct answer is GM plus, but it goes much deeper than that. There's a wealth of resources for them to tap into, but it's an important question because it also shows the initiative of the hiring manager too, right? It shows the initiative of the person you'll be working closely with. So those are just some key 4 questions I have found to be very quick, very informal, that you can ask in almost any setting.
Amazing. Thank you. I encourage everyone in the audience to write those down. Sharday, I'll kick it over to you next.
Well, Caden, I mean, I'm just like, when he had told me about the pronouns, how he initially does it for his phone screens, I was like, I'm stealing that and telling everyone, because what a way to just welcome someone into the company and have that safe space to feel seen and to know that you're accepted. And that's what we all really want, whether we want to admit to or not. We want to feel seen. So I love that initially that's how you're introducing someone to GM. I would say, again, ask about programs, any initiatives or programs we have, ERGs, BRGs, a network, mentorship. Also, too, you can ask about speaking to someone, an ally or employee that's part of the community. And also people use LinkedIn as a tool to research. If you know that you're interviewing for a company, and find someone from that company, rather, if they have something about pride, or they have a logo, a star, something, the rainbow, you can definitely ask questions and say, how is the culture like for you? What is the career development looking like? Because that's how you're really going to be able to find out if this is a place for you. I remember I attended a NSBE event, and someone, a young Black professional, came to me and said, what's the culture like? And, it's like, they're not asking about the cafeteria or the parking area. They're asking for a young Black professional, what does that look like for me in my career development? So that's why, it's okay to do a little research. It's okay to speak to people. And even if you forget to ask the recruiter or hiring manager, there's still an onboarding process. So you still can dig a little bit more. And, we welcome that.
Thank you for sharing some more tips. Mariko, if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yes, I have a couple little things. So I'm yes-anding Caden and Sharday, because obviously they have a little bit more experience in TA than me. I'm just a little engineer. But something else that I did when I was going through college and trying to find out, what employers do I even want to consider to work with? Who do I want to internship? What opportunities are available to me? I actually turned to the HRC. So there's something called the Human Rights Campaign. I'm sure a lot of you will know it. I remember my first introduction was back in the 2010s. So I was still in school, and they had that little blue square with that yellow equal sign. I was like, oh, this is for gay equality. I support that. I put it on my laptop, called it a day. But then as an adult, I really learned what the HRC was for, and I realized it is one of the greatest resources out there, especially in the continental United States, to see what companies are doing the work. Because, we talk about rainbow washing at Pride. It's that time of year, right? Who's just turning their logo rainbow? Who's showing up? And the HRC has something called the Corporate Equality Index. So it's a score out of 100%. You get your little A, B, C, D, E, F grade, whatever. But it tells you how inclusive the policies at that workplace are objectively. So they'll look at things like Caden had mentioned, domestic partner benefits. So HRC requires those to be the same as, cis, het, straight couples benefits, and other things like that. So you can go to HRC. That's a great resource. Also looking up different conferences that happen. So a really great conference in the tech and engineering space, in the STEAM space, would be Lesbians Who Tech. You could look at Out and Equal. You can look at O4U, which is out for undergrad. There's also OSTEM. So OSTEM does undergrad and graduate programs. But they're all centered around queer individuals. And you can see which organizations are paying sponsorship fees every year to show up and recruit at queer events, right? So I always say, from recruiting, we do have HBCUs, which are great to find Black candidates. We do have some universities that tend to have a higher Latina component in their students, right? So there's different universities we can look at for different qualifiers. But when we look at queer, we don't have a queer university, right? There's no like, oh yeah, I go to University of Gay. It just doesn't happen. So looking at those conferences instead as like the number one place for us as large companies to record or recruit queer individuals also tells you, you know, there's companies doing it. So you can see who sponsors at what level for all of these different conferences. You can see which organizations show up at every single conference. And like Sade said, LinkedIn is such a incredible resource. I know my involvement in GM started from a LinkedIn message. I reached out to the Purdue recruiter and I was like, hey, I saw that y'all will be in town next week. What day are you getting in town? I'd love to sit down and ask you some questions ahead of time. And it was a little schmoozy and it's part of the job application process, sadly, but it gave me, you know, that foot in the door. It gave me that opportunity. And something else I say is connect with every single person you meet. So when I get off this call today, I'm going to send out my little LinkedIn request to all the incredible individuals who made this event happen. And I encourage all of you who are watching, send me a LinkedIn message, be like, hey, I saw you today, and I'd love to connect with you. There's a lot of great queer individuals who are doing the work and want to connect you to the right people, like a Sade, like a Caden, like a Nicolette, like a Jameson, who can get you the foot in the door that you need. Networking is a huge component in getting you where you need to go. And it's that support system we talk about, right? Have that support system who's willing to vouch for your work, your ethics, your morals, who you are, and utilize that. Take advantage of that.
Thank you so much. I think the two takeaways from this for me would be like just how important doing the research is. And again, not saying the burden needs to be on every individual to have to go out and do that research, but places need to make that accessible, right? Organizations need to make that accessible. And so research is what the Muse and Fairygodboss are all about. And so check out the Muse and Fairygodboss for opportunities too. But yeah, I mean, talking about networking, LinkedIn is huge for that, and connecting with people that you might work with one day, and learning how they're doing the work and how you can get involved is huge. So networking and research continue to be, as we all know, continue to be a really huge part of this job search, career change journey, as we say. So yeah, thank you all for sharing that. I think I'm definitely excited to get into this next question because it's come up a few times, but all of our panelists joining us today are members of the GM Plus Employee Resource Group. So I would love to hear from each one of you what the ERG has done and is actively working on today to help members of the LGBTQ plus community feel supported at work. So I will kick it over to Jameson first.
So I can speak from a career development kind of standpoint. That's one of the things that I love to do. I call it my extracurriculars, which is that I love to help coach people on being better public speakers or creating PowerPoints, and I do also innovation challenges where I'm a coach for that. And so I love coaching people, and being the career development chair just felt like the perfect match for what I like to do and how I can help support the community. And so one of the things that we have is we have mentorship programs, and we've got a couple different types of mentorship programs that we offer throughout the year. Some are, networking with executives, where people get to talk to some of those higher up leaders that you don't necessarily get to talk to, that are either part of the community or an ally. And so it's really great for people to see that. And then we have peer mentor groups. One of the things that I'm hoping to kind of work through this year is having workshops on stereotype threat and code switching and imposter syndrome and some of those things that everybody struggles with, to just kind of give people more of that confidence in being who they are. And one of my passion projects is to have some sort of a podcast interviewing people in different minorities, so that we can celebrate the differences that make us all unique, but also understand that there are so many similarities, and just wanting to live a full, rich, authentic life is what everyone wants. And so those are kind of some of the things that we're doing for career development wise within the organization.
Amazing. Thank you. Sharday, I'll kick it to you.
For me, I mean, I have been a part of a lot of BRGs, ERGs in previous companies, even was a president in one area. I would say GM, seriously, especially GM Plus, has just raised the bar with the engagement piece, the educational piece, creating a safe space, not just saying it, but doing it. You know, when I first joined, I was like, whoa, this is a lot of meetings. I was just trying to get a t-shirt. No, I'm just playing. But I love the passion. I love the eagerness to create a better workspace, not just for the people right now at GM, but the people that are coming into GM. Yesterday, we had a panel discussion, More Than a Label, part of our Pride theme. And to have an open place in a professional setting to talk about, you know, past either trials or celebrations, and to be really your authentic self and to teach and educate others that, you know, I'm more than just a label. I'm not, you know, just bi or queer, or this is what happens when their assumptions take place. You know, it was such a beautiful moment that I just was like in awe of thinking that we've come to this place that we can be open, that we can say how we really feel and who we are and be seen and heard. Someone who is a minority, it's just like, it just does a lot because I understand when you don't have a voice or you feel like you don't have a place to say something, and how that feels to be quiet. You know, I think as African-American, Black, a lot of the time, especially a woman, we're so cautious about, you know, you don't want to be the angry Black person. You don't want to be aggressive, all the A words, you know, you just, so I'll just sit here and do my work and keep my head down. And to create a space where it's like, no, keep your head up. I want to hear from you. What else do you have to say? It's beautiful. And we're not, you know, perfect, but we are on the right track and we're striving to do more. So that blows me away. And I'm just proud of being at this company. I'm also proud to be a part of the GM Plus and to be under leadership that we do have, because I tell you, I'm not just saying this to tune our horns, but amazing job all around. So I'm excited to see what the future holds.
I love it. This is a time to toot your own horn. Go ahead. But I also, I love that the space is being created clearly, and you all have such different kind of takeaways from that. So Mariko, if there's anything you'd like to add, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I think something that so first of all, Sharday almost had me in tears because amazing Sharday, but also I think Sharday really kind of hit it on the head, and so did Jameson, that, you know, even though there's always going to be people who are going to have some problem with somebody, GM as a whole, as an organization, doesn't have a lot of tolerance for that, right? We are pushing to be as inclusive as we can. We have people who are doing the work, participating in these ERGs. And while you can't have everyone be perfect in every company, we have enough people willing to try. And I think because we've instilled it not only in how we operate as a company, but into our culture, truly, that this is something we want to do as an organization, it's made all the difference. I know we had mentioned some of the things we do as an ERG, but I think more than anything, it's that we've designated as a company space for each of these groups, whether that's G-Man, which is our Black ERG, or GM Veterans, which, you know, is for our veterans group. Every single one of those groups has a space that is designated for them as their space. And something really great that I love to see is through those organizations, we have those opportunities, like those networking with executives, that is only held for our queer ERG members, right? Or our allied ERG members. And so those people who usually have that be something that, you know, you think that's working against me, that is being celebrated and highlighted as something we want to make sure our executives are seeing. Something else that I really loved is just the relationships, even that we see on our board, right? So I always joke, you know, it's nice to work with your friends, but not always a great idea. And I was lucky enough that when I was on this board, I started with a bunch of really great coworkers who I all admired professionally. And they have turned into some of my closest confidants and people that I truly, truly feel I can trust. Because not only in the LGBTQ community do we have queer people, we have people from every other marginalized group present with us every single day. And I think looking at the fact that intersectionality has become such a high point of the way we work as ERGs within GM has really changed the understanding people have for why DE&I is important, but also has created equitable spaces, right? We're able to have those conversations. I had a conversation with one of my coworkers who's actually staying with me this week for Pride this weekend about me being autistic yesterday. And I said, my autism really controls my life. And he's like, but don't you feel like that's a negative way to view it? And then we had a discussion. And for the first time, he understood how me having autism not only affects my neurological health, my biological health, and my physical health, but also just my well-being, right? And through those relationships we're gaining through GM and that intersectionality that we're highlighting, we're now able to create a relationship that, is very meaningful to me, but also allows me to show up as my whole self and for me to advocate for myself. I, was able to correct someone, and I'm not very extroverted. So correcting someone's a big deal for me, but I was able to correct someone with no fear. I was able to say, hey, that's not my truth. Let me tell you what my truth is. And that was accepted at face value. And I think that's something that's really big is, people say truth is relative. And to some extent it is, right? Your truth is not the same as my truth. But for everyone to be able to show up with their truth, their authentic truth, and for that to be a complete, it's like no, right? No is a complete sentence. Your truth is a complete sentence. There's no if, ands, or but about it. I use she, they pronouns. That's the end of it. I'm a non-binary woman. That's the end of it, right? And I think we've fostered that intersectionality within our DE&I organization, within our group, which has been such an incredible privilege to be part of.
I love it. I think too, something that's coming up is, yes, it's important to do the work to benefit now, but thinking about the future. And I think Sade spoke about this, is like all of this work that the ERG is doing is not just for today, but it's for the long haul, right? It's like, how do we start to make a difference that will impact us for years on end? And I think too, the relationships piece that Mariko has been speaking about, it's hugely important. We talk about that in the queer community, is like chosen family and creating fostering relationships with people, whether that be personally or professionally, and maybe the two kind of intersect down the line. It's huge. So thank you all for sharing the wonderful work it seems that the ERG is doing. So thank you. This next question is one of my favorites. It's something that we have kind of touched on a little bit, especially in this last question, but how can we encourage and empower LGBTQIA plus employees to bring their whole selves to work? And what are the benefits of doing so? So I wanted to kind of take a minute and share a personal experience of for myself. But when I was just joining the workforce, I was 22 years old, and I got a job at a very large corporation that recruited undergrads from all different colleges and universities across the country. We were all coming from very different backgrounds, and there was this fear that I was not going to be accepted for who I truly was, despite who I was dating or anything that I knew about myself. So I chose to take that piece completely out of it, and I was not out at work by any means. I didn't tell anyone explicitly. And it wasn't until I was like extremely unhappy in my role in a lot of different ways. But I know that was contributing to it, because it wasn't until about 2 years later, I sat down for an interview with our amazing sales leader here at the Muse. And she asked me, what is a recent challenge you've had to face? And this was around the time I started coming out. And I said that I took a beat and I said, coming out. And I was shocked at myself. My jaw dropped. I was like, did I just say that to you? And it was this moment too. It was like, oh my God, I'm so scared, but I feel so free. And it was so gratifying to just like feel that weight. I literally describe it as like a weight that comes off my shoulders. I knew that if I was, luckily I landed the job, but if I was open to a potential new job, I needed to bring my whole self to work to be able to like benefit from those relationships and like show up as myself. Because I knew what that looked like if I didn't. So wanted to kind of do it right the second time around. So yeah, not only has that obviously helped me personally, but professionally. And I definitely wouldn't have been, I wouldn't be here today. The sales leader and I talk about it all the time. Like that moment is so impactful in my life. So I thank her for that. So thank you, Micah. But yeah, would love to kind of kick it over to the panelists to hear if anyone's willing to share some words of encouragement here.
Well, Nicola, thank you for sharing too. We love hearing your story as well. If I could add on, one thing I say about encouraging employees to show up is thanking them for sharing with you. I'm someone who is a true believer in being vulnerable. If you ask me a question, as long as I'm comfortable with it, I will answer it. But thanking someone for being vulnerable, that takes so much bravery to share parts of you which I'm not going to be 100% accepted when I share this new thing about me. I can face discrimination. I can face malice because I've chosen to disclose this to you. Thank them. Every single time someone comes out to me, even though I've partially made this my job to be a queer leader, right? I still thank them. Thank them for trusting you. Thank them for having the belief in you as a person to be safe. And I also think be grateful that someone was even willing to give you the chance. And I think that's the same for the corporation, right? If you as a corporation are asking for that information to help better serve your employees, show them what you are doing with that information. Give them that transparency. Say, we're trying to figure out where we fall demographically so we can best support you, and then follow through on it. I think the biggest thing is always making sure that you're following through with your word and you're not just saying things. Words are empty without action. And I think that action is the most essential step. Say thank you. Highlight people whose voices should be heard, make them feel seen, make them feel safe. And then on top of that, check yourself. Always, always check yourself. I've been in activism for years, and I will never, ever, ever claim expertise, because the biggest thing about going into these spaces, into DE&I, is realizing that you do not know anything. That is the number one thing. And just starting with that mindset and realizing that every person who's choosing to tell me something, every single time they're choosing to bring up something that irritated them, a way that they felt, rejected, they're trusting me to then sit by their side and support them. And how lucky am I to be able to support them now? So I think that's really big. Show up as a support system for those who choose to trust you.
That's huge. Thank you.
I'll go next and yes and that. I want to kind of call back to something that Mariko said earlier, talking about having friends and community. That is a huge thing. If you can find a group of people that will uplift you and support you through that, that can make it easier to want to kind of come out. And I will say, from a personal story, I talked about this a little bit yesterday in a panel, but 10 years ago, I tried my best to blend into the background and not make waves, not be visible, keep my head down, and all of those kinds of things. And then slowly I started getting more confidence, and I had I called them Easter eggs, of like a tattoo that is queer adjacent, where if you see it and then you know that I'm somebody that you can talk to. And if you don't know what it means, then it's just a really cool tattoo, and it's a conversation starter and just another way to build community. But I made these little choices to build up to the point where now I have rainbow colored hair, and it's really hard to blend into the background when you have rainbow colored hair. And I'm purposely choosing bright clothing or a unique gender expression so that I'm not a background character, because I'm willing to stand up. So sometimes it just takes making little tiny steps to build the confidence to take that giant leap, to say, look, here's me. I'm going to be loud. I'm going to be out front, and take it or leave it.
I'll add just something very quick. I am a remote employee. I think a lot of us have companies that, if not part of the workforce, is offsite or remote. That would be a bit unusual in a lot of circumstances these days. So knowing that I have a trans experience in my background, one of the things that makes it possible for me to be myself is literally not having to worry every single day about how my mannerisms, how my voice sounds, how, if I am queer enough to belong to the community, am I trans enough to be identified? And sometimes I don't want to be identified, right? I want to just blend into the woodwork, like what Jameson was saying. I don't have rainbow hair, mostly because I don't have hair, but the possibilities of having that remote presence can make things really difficult. And one of the things that GM Plus has done a really good job of is that like we have virtual Fridays where we're having a coffee chat. And even if I don't say a single thing, I'm going into that and I'm having probably a ridiculous conversation to someone who I don't know and part of the company that I've never interacted with, but I'm building the community because even though I'm remote, I now know these people. I now know, the types of dialogues that are happening and I'm not being excluded, right? It's not just that I don't have the ability to go to pride events sometimes, but it's also that sometimes I can't go to the events because of my work schedule or whatever may have you. And I think creating opportunities for remote employees to engage is one of the hardest things you can do as far as an ERG and employee initiative. But I've been very proud of the way that workforces have kind of developed these internal communities. So having those internal discussions, even whether it's an MS Teams conversation or you're having a discussion board, I think those are all really important pieces to keeping that community going with a remote workforce. It means a lot more.
Absolutely. I think we can, any remote worker that, is working from home, working from a cafe, wherever it may be. I think we all have experienced a little bit of that like disconnection from the company and from your coworkers. And so I think like this adds another layer to it. It's like there's this opportunity to either be like, this is me, this is my full self, or there's opportunities to not do that. And I think both are actually okay. And I think that's something that we can also take away from this is that you can be your full self and that looks different in different scenarios. So I think that's a really important piece to highlight, and thank you for bringing that up. I think something else that came up earlier was like, yes, we want to focus on how this community may be different, but I think at the end of the day it's also important to realize that we're all very similar because we're people and we're humans and we have thoughts and feelings and opinions. And yes, we may be different from one another, but we can all relate to the fact that we are human beings. So I think I'll kind of leave it at that, but I want everyone to take, and take that with you and think about what that means for you as part of this discussion today. I want to thank you all for answering all of these questions and being here with us today. That's a wrap on our formal questions, but a few really great questions have come in through the chat. So I wanted to take a few minutes before we wrap to answer some of those. And whoever wants to answer, feel free, just jump off mute and go right ahead. I love this question. I think it's come up a few times, especially as we talked about GM Plus, your ERG. Can you speak to the importance of having separate ERGs and not one ERG due to maybe the small size of a company?
Can I speak to that? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
So I'm really big into DE&I, if you couldn't have told by like the rest of this conversation. But something that we talked about at GM was while we were looking at different locations, we wanted to do ERG chapters for our specific ERG. We came to that same thing. Why can't we just have one ERG for like all of the people across the globe who are queer? So we want to have just GM Plus. So even just with GM Plus, the way we've tackled it, we actually have separate chapters based on location. And that is one way we've been able to implement that. And then looking at separating those from other ERGs, something that we brought to leadership 30 years ago now was this is important to us. We need to speak our truth about our community. And if you don't have a separate ERG to speak for your community, you're going to miss the opportunity to learn intersectionally then from other ERGs. When you have one ERG, like, oh, we're just going to do inclusion. Inclusion is one portion of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you do not have inclusion for all of those different groups and separately recognize those groups and the problems that they face in their individual communities, you're not providing equity and you're not providing inclusion. I think something GM has done splendidly is develop our ERGs. We now have, I think, 13 or 14 for all these different groups. And most of them now have an intersectionality lead associated with that specific ERG because we need to listen to that other ERG. I can't speak to the Black experience. So I go to G-Man to learn about the Black experience and how I can then support my Black coworkers and the Black ERG members within GM Plus, right? I can't learn that if I'm just like, well, there's racial inequity. Racial inequity for Black people is different than racial inequity for Asian people, right? That is a completely different minority experience. And you cannot have equity without thorough education in each area. And without that thorough education, you're actually just, I think it's kind of icky, but it just kind of erases what those marginalized groups are feeling. And it takes them down to, you are all just one marginalized group. And I don't care what the size is. We have GM Europe, which is another branch we have, and they have what they call their like DE&I team. But each ERG that is represented within that team, even though it's only represented by one person, we have one GM plus ERG member in Europe, right? He's all by himself. Olivier, we love you. But he speaks for GM plus, but he has a Black counterpart that speaks to the Black experience in Europe. We have a MENA representative who speaks about the Middle Eastern experience in Europe. And even though there's only 5 or 6 of them, each of them chooses a specific topic to champion, because, you know, one group can't champion all. You have to have individual subject matter experts to speak on those. And if you don't have that representation and you aren't guaranteeing a space at the table for each of those different identities, then nobody's getting a seat at the table. Without designated space being held for a marginalized group, that marginalized group will continue to be marginalized and discriminated against. You must hold space for people if you want them to feel recognized and safe. And holding space isn't enough. You must also then do the work. So that's why I think it's important.
Thank you. I would plus 1,000 to that. It's about representation too, right? Bringing everyone to that table is important. Awesome. Unless anybody wants to answer that same question, I think we might have time for 1 or 2 more. This next one, we've talked a little bit about this, but if there are any additional thoughts here, how can you encourage all of your coworkers around you to feel safe to be their authentic self around you?
One of the things that I started doing, and again, this was before my gender adventure, was to put my pronouns in my email signature. My birth name is very androgynous, and because I'm an engineer, I get the label assigned. Oh, okay, you must be male, and they look at my name and they would go, "Oh, that's androgynous," and they're an engineer. They must be male, and I would get misgendered in a professional setting as a cisgender person. And now that I've gone on this gender adventure, I love when I get to see other people who have their pronouns, because then it's not me versus other. It's not, oh, you're the strange person in the room. It's, we're all the same, and it becomes normalized and it just becomes part of society. And one of the things that I love, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, is Mary Barra, our CEO, has her pronouns listed because she believes in these kinds of things. So I think one of the best things that you can do is put your pronouns out there.
Yes, I love that, Jameson. And if I can yes and you, something I talked about earlier was vulnerability. Be vulnerable. Trust people to trust you. Something I tell people a lot is that, you know, I'm always willing to make an ass out of myself as long as you'll laugh and know I'm not going to judge you later. And I really take that to heart. You can ask Sade, Jameson. I am as goofy as they come. I don't believe in formality. I think it's stupid. But I love being goofy and silly and letting my inner child also be happy, right? If you think about it, I remember growing up, I was like, oh, when I'm 20, I'm going to be so old. And then I turned 20, I was like, wow, I'm a grown child. That's amazing. But I think reminding ourselves that we all have that inner child, you know, is always there, that we're trying to protect. And if you choose to make that person feel seen, make that person feel heard, not only do they let their guard down, but then they'll also help you feel seen and heard. Jameson and I met each other virtually 2 years ago, and we've been practically inseparable since, because I showed up and shared my truth, and Jameson said yes. And that was it. They're like, that is your truth. And I think we've kind of had a friendship like that since. Every single time there's something new. When Jameson started their gender adventure and then I started mine, and we went through all these things together that were new and scary, but we always stayed vulnerable. And the biggest thing is we stayed respectful and supportive. I didn't understand how Jameson's gender journey was different than mine, but we both recognized that we were going through something and chose to mutually validate. You can always choose to mutually validate. And something else I think is really helpful is just signaling. We've always had signaling in the queer community, whether that's from our Doc Martin laces, the carabiner on our pants, or a cute little pin. But what I do is I have pins for everything. I have a support Black women. I have a protect Black trans women. I have a I'm AAPI. I have a you are safe with me, everybody in pin. Signal. Let people know through signals that you're safe, and then show up and follow through.
I'm going to just add one thing. It's okay if they don't want to be open about who they are at work. Ultimately, your vulnerability is your choice. And even though we can encourage people to feel as comfortable as they are, there's always going to be a little thing in the backside of their head that maybe doesn't believe that. And there's lots of reasons for that, but it's completely fine if somebody doesn't want to tell you their life story. It's totally fine, totally valid. And if somebody does, validate them and do all of the things that you can do to make sure that person is comfortable. But ultimately, they don't need to disclose who they are to you. You just need to respect it.
And Kaden, I was thinking the same thing. I like just show grace and be kind to one another. Grace on both sides. As an ally, I know a lot of times that, I feel like, oh, let me help. How can I help? Sometimes you don't need all that. Just listen and be a shoulder to lean on, or someone to support and push you forward, and also too, as an ally, someone may give you a little bit of vulnerability, but also just, be graceful about it, because you never know what trauma or what trigger that person went through. And not everyone's the same. Like what Kaden said, I know in the Black community, a lot of times we don't talk about being gay, bi, queer. A lot of times you hear the assumptions like Black people don't do that. But, it's just exempt. We don't do that. We don't talk about it. So a lot of things is culture. So it's just be graceful about it, because you never know someone's story. And that's where the be kind is as well.
Absolutely. And I think it brings up a topic of kind of like vulnerability and what your safety looks like at that moment or at that point in time. So really important points to hone in on. I know we're a little bit over time, and I'm happy that we went over time, because this was such an amazing group of panelists. I want to thank you all for joining today's discussion. A special thank you to Sharday, Kaden, Jameson, Mariko for sharing your stories and your thoughts. It was such a great conversation, and it comes at a really important time, as I think we all know. While Pride Month is intended to be a celebration of the LGBTQIA+ community and a moment to uplift our voices, I want to also acknowledge that our community is still very much at risk, and that makes these conversations and resources all the more important. So I really encourage everyone that has tuned in today to recognize the power of diversity and inclusivity that we've spoken about, and how it can continue to drive success in our workplaces and beyond. So I hope you have all found this panel helpful, and we hope to see you back here soon. Take care and happy Pride Month.